Okay, welcome everyone to another Housing for All campaign. The timing of this is so important. And when we're talking about protecting our housing rights, protecting our land rights. And I feel compelled today um, on this 25th of September to acknowledge that our brother, Marcellus Williams, was lynched, state sanctioned lynching that happened. He was housed in what we know as a modern day penitentiary, modern day plantation. If you haven't read Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, I think that that's really clear as to what's happening within our prison system. And we had a state sanctioned lynching when it was clear that our brother A maybe should not even have been there on the plantation. So I just felt like before we get into housing rights, before we get into land rights, I just wanted to just acknowledge that we lost a life. And that we as Black, which is why we do this, that our lives do matter, and we have to tell our stories, and we have to use our platform, and we have to use our voices to fight for our God-given rights. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know, Andy, if you wanted to add anything in addition to that piece, but it was just on my heart from yesterday until this morning to just acknowledge our brother there, Marcellus.
Yeah, there's some history around the Missouri Compromise and the rights of our people, period. And with I've seen over 1.4 million petition signatures on the petition, and I think that brings us to a very critical moment that this is an election year in Missouri, and there's an attorney general that's running, that's an advocate of the people, and I think we need to look into his campaign, and more importantly, we need to understand what an elected official's role is. So, what is the governor's role? Because the governor took an oath, and that oath is to protect the rights of the people and their property. And while they considered Brother Marcellus their property, he still swore an oath and he violated that oath. And by violating that oath, he committed treason, he warred against the Constitution, and it is murder, plain out murder. And he didn't respect the rights of the people because the family said, no, we want to commute a sentence to life. The prosecutor said, look, there's some grave miscarriage of justice. We're coming into an agreement for life. And those Ku Klux Klan members disguised as judicial officers said, we're not going to honor that. And that it's time that we, the people, specifically us people of color and the marginalized community that have been oppressed, it's time for us to create a new government. And now it's time to reverse the curse. And Mr. Governor, fake governor, maybe you should be sitting in the same cell Marcellus was in. Because I believe in an eye for an eye in this position, because that's what their laws or words or whatever they say. Treason is punishable by death, and that governor committed a modern day lynching, and the sentence should be death.
I couldn't agree more. And this is one of the reasons why I'm a proponent of what you do, Andy, is you understand constitutionally and by law what the rights are of us as citizens of the United States, as a marginalized folks, as Native, Indigenous to the land. And so we are going to couch this conversation specifically around housing and land rights. But the point is, there's a larger piece here about our rights as citizens, period, and how we can use the Constitution and the Court of Laws in order to ensure that our rights are honored and respected. So, Andy, let's bring that to the housing side of things. So let's just couch this in law. What are the rights as those of us who are here in the United States as citizens, Native American, Indigenous populations, etc.? What are the rights as it relates to our housing and to our property / land ownership?
Right. Well, just for clarification purposes, Andy does not consider himself a citizen of the United States. And the reason why is because if you look at the Constitution, it says we the people, not we the citizens. That word is used to consider us to be property, to participate into their system. So we have to distinguish between the people and the citizen. And this is something we're not going to be taught in civics. This is something that we're not taught in government. We just don't really understand or know the difference. So I just want to clarify that. And when we talk about our land rights, I'm very big on the Aboriginal and indigenous to the land, because who did you get the land from in the first place? And with the indigenous and the Aboriginal, they were in tune with the land, like they communicated with the land. Wherever the buffalo went, they followed it because they knew that was a trail where they would eat and survive. They never took more than what was needed. And now you get this colonial system, and that mindset is in us. A lot of us have been indoctrinated into that mindset without even knowing, and we're after a land grab. And instead of using the land, the earth, and its natural resource for what it was intended to be. And the history of this colonial system, it goes back to this thing called the Papa Bull, where they were saying you can take the land wherever you conquer. You know, wherever you conquer, you can take the land. And so that's where you begin to see the slaughter of our ancestors so they could get that land grab. And if you follow up to Malcolm X, and he said, you know, you didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. That's because we were already here. You see what I'm saying? We were already here on the land. And I could take this down a trail where I don't believe our ancestors came over on the boat like they say it was, because we already occupied the land. I think our history has been distorted of telling the truth. So we don't know we're the original ones from this land. But our mindset was not a colonial mindset. It was not like an oppressive mindset. It was like, hey, nature gave us this land. We're all going to enjoy it. And so when it comes to our rights, we talk about reparations, but restitution is saying give us the land back. And the land is where we thrive. The land is where we flourish. The land is where I'm independent. And my rights on my land is why they passed the Second Amendment. Because you couldn't just come onto my land and run up in my house with this no-knock warrant stuff, because you're going to catch a rifle buck in your butt high running up on here. So you know what I'm saying? That's so much of that history has not been taught in the correct manner. So you have to begin to learn about your rights and dealing with those land rights. They're saying we want the land. You know, we want the land. It's the doctrine of discovery, where they say where another part, wherever you find land that you can just claim it, you know, put your name on it, stake on it. And that took the land from our ancestors. And I'm saying it's time for us to take the reparations, but use it also in a form of restitution to buy the land. So now we got private property, don't trespass against my land. So that's the part of the land.
I love that. Love the fact that you talked about restitution versus reparations. So what is your solution for us to get our land back? Are we saying purchasing? Are we saying go through the court system? What exactly are the strategies that you think would be the most viable for those of us who are native and indigenous to the United States?
I'm going to say by any means necessary, because I love me some Malcolm. But I always use a 3-step process: litigation, legislation, and run for office. Litigation, we can go to court, but if the judicial officers are violating their oath, as we see right now, that's not always guaranteed. Legislation, repeal all these unconstitutional acts that have been infringing and depriving upon our rights. Andy's not interested in passing more bills. That's not my position. My position is you put too many bills out here and nobody can afford the bills. So we need to repeal all of this legislation that has only kept us in a chokehold and oppressed and deprived us of our rights. And then the third component is to run for office. When our generation, along with the movement of the 60s, from the hippies, the Mexican Revolution, the civil rights in a very subtle way, civil rights, because you don't have civil rights, you have natural rights, but there's some positive about that. The Panther Party, you know, that 60 movement, it's time for us to become the government. That's what I mean by running for office. I don't mean you take on this ideology of you following what you see somebody else doing. I'm saying you pick up the book and you understand what the job description is of an elected official. You understand the Oath Act, which is the very first bill that was passed through Congress, which I do solemnly swear to support the Constitution. That's an oath or an affirmation, because I wouldn't do an oath, I'll just affirm. And then when we run for office, we will have a nation by the people for the people, because we are the people. That's what I believe is so important to get the land back. Because even though in the 60s they passed this Fair Housing Act dealing with redlining and, everything, that the landlord, tenant, all this goofy stuff, when there's no one to enforce that, when there's been a deprivation of it, we're still back in the same situation, doing another march, another rally saying housing rights matter. No, they matter when we make them matter. And so if that means we sue whoever we got to sue collectively, get that money and buy the land, buy a dealership, whatever we got to do. That's why I go back to by any means necessary. Whatever we have to do to put us back into our natural habitat, our natural way of living, whereas nature's God and the creator, man, we'll live off the land forever. We got to set it up for the next generations, to visit in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th generation. And it cannot be based on this material, tangible concept. In fact, just last night, I was watching something on Netflix about the pygmies, and they were in these, places. I can't even know. They showed everywhere they was at. But the point I was saying is they moved. When there was no food and the leaves changed up, they would move as a whole unit. Oh, and they would build these houses out of nature. The leaves, the bendable plants, they were so in tune with nature. And that's what we have to get back to. And I'm painting the picture because we don't hear people talking about this like this. So we got to make this become the new thing. We got to make this be the new popular thing, is let's get back in tune with nature. And now we're not tripping about all this stuff. And they going over there cutting the trees down in their natural habitat, when we could just use the stalk from the hemp plants to build housing, because there's hempcrete, hemp wood, Kentucky, Kansas or Kentucky, I think it's Kansas. They got whole sawmills that they're resurrecting that's using the hemp stalks to create manufacturing jobs and careers. That's all a form of housing. That's a way that we have a solution. And so often I always hear about what the system or what the white man is doing, and nobody is stopping us from creating opportunities for ourselves other than what we're saying out of our mouth. If we stop saying that and we start implementing it, we good. There's movements around here, buy the block back. Buy the block back, and don't go trying to do your own thing when somebody else is already doing it. We take the models that's working and then we expand upon them.
I love that. So, essentially, and what really resonated is when you said it only matters if we make it matter, and then let us be the solutions. Let us create the opportunities and the solutions for ourselves. You did mention the Fair Housing Act of 1964, 1965. I can't remember the exact year. And that we're still seeing illegal evictions, et cetera, et cetera. Can we just talk about that? I know this is not exactly what we're talking about in terms of let's create our own solutions, but these are the frameworks of which people still have their mindset around. How can people start fighting illegal evictions? What can they use? What are some of the tools that I know that you yourself have used to fight some of these cases on behalf of your clients?
So the foreclosure crisis, everybody's aware of that, the economy collapsing. I was a mortgage broker, and my fight against this started in 2004. So before the 2008, I was already in a foreclosure with the Bank of New York Mellon. I fought that foreclosure for 13 years. So I learned everything about the pooling services agreement, the trust, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, all self-taught, because who was there to teach? This was like brand new. And I learned it from A through Z, what was going on. Fast forward to 2021, I get discriminated in an apartment complex renewal. Straight up discrimination. Got the evidence clear as day. I sued under the Fair Housing Act. And what the Fair Housing Act basically said is you cannot discriminate because of familial status, race, creed, sex, whatever it is. me, you see, I'm a person of color. I'm kinfolk, copper tone. That's what I say. And my wife is Puerto Rican. And I use that as a familiar status as one. And then because of what they perceived my race to be, because I have a nationality. A race is like, the marathon. This is just me, y'all. I'm sharing it so you hear my heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had no clue about going to trial. I didn't understand evidence, how to put it together, but I did go though. Trust me, I did. I learned. So even though I didn't win the jury trial, although the jury deliberated for 6 hours, I didn't truly comprehend how to bring the claim together. That case is on the appellate in the appellate court for some pretrial motions that the judge he ruled incorrectly. But prior to me even filing the suit on the discrimination, I filed a claim with HUD. HUD gave it to the Illinois Human Rights Commission, and they ruled in my favor on discrimination. I'm telling you that if what I've read and learned about, damages over here, we're looking at a cool meal ticket, okay? Which I would just take that money and go buy a house. That's what I would do. I wouldn't like, I'm gonna go buy because I want my land. I want the property because this is how I'm made whole. So from that process, I learned so much about the Fair Housing Act, what it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to operate, the formerly incarcerated, how they're being discriminated in housing areas. So much that's going wrong with that as I alluded in the beginning, we can utilize that as a tool. But the other tool, and I want us to always be mindful of this, we have the ability to buy our own land and build our own housing complexes, making it privatized, and then we can sustain our own self. And that's the model of Black Wall Street. We can't forget Black Wall Street just wasn't in Greenwood, which we know it as Tulsa, Oklahoma, but in Greenwood, it was also in North Carolina, Chicago, other states. We have to go back to that early 1900s, even the 1800s when the freedmen had land too. So it was there, but we have to go back and learn from that history to resurrect it and implement it so we can stop sounding like we need something from the government in a handout. What we need from the government is to follow their oath and protect our rights and our property. That's what we need them to do, not pass some legislation that's infringing or depriving upon our rights. But when you study the history of the Fair Housing Act, the government is always quick. I won't say quick, but they put stuff in place, but then they don't hold themselves accountable when they violate that. Because the Fair Housing Act, if you really want to know, it was the government that was depriving us of our rights and our property back then. So they're going to bring an act out against them. And so now they have a discretion to determine, you didn't state a claim. Which goes back to what I said. We have to become the government now. We're in a time where our generation needs to rise up and say, we got the blueprint, we got the solution. We done been in the wilderness, we done been on the merry-go-round long enough to say, hell no. We ain't, the old banana in the tailpipe thing Eddie Murphy did. We hip to that game now. So we're not falling for that. And I think we have to look at it from a holistic approach when it comes to housing, is how we buy the block back. What if we went and said, listen, you got these housing projects, we'll take them off your hands for $1, and then we turn them into condos. And then we give them to our people. Transitional housing.
Right. I mean, we're seeing that. It's just that it's not us who's doing that. We've got other folks who are coming into our communities. And in fact, one of my last guests basically said, we don't even really have communities anymore. We barely have neighborhoods. We've been so disenfranchised. So we have a comment from Justine, who says, I think buying the land and building from scratch feels a lot more complex without as much guidance. And you said, let's go back to what they did in Black Wall Street. Let's look at the freedmen in the 1900s. Can you still just give an outline of just a general blueprint? I understood you just said we could go and buy some of the project housing for $1. That's obviously going to your local governments who own that property and saying, like, we have the capacity and the ability to rehab and use use this particular land. Part of that is also going to be about us becoming the government, being really informed with the government, understanding what's happening from a local perspective. What are the current zoning laws? What are some of the legislatures and policies that need to be repealed so that we can continue to have unencumbered access to our land and to our property? So, but if you could just continue to go just a little bit deeper, maybe 4 or 5 steps that you think make sense as we're thinking about looking back at our Black Wall Streets that were all across the United States, as you mentioned.
So, one, I think it takes 2 or 3 people to come together with an agreement, with a plan, and it can start as easy as one lot. One house. We're going to rehab this house. We'll make 20,000 or 10,000, and invest that into another one until we get, because I think so often we look at the overall picture and we want it fixed overnight. And no, it's a journey. It's a process. The beautiful thing about the process, though, is there's people already doing it. So I got a brother in Ohio, Brother Camus. Let me not butcher his name, but he takes shipping containers and turns them into housing. So that is like a model that not only eradicates poverty, because now we're doing prefab shipping containers, putting them, the walls and everything together. And now we are having semi-trailers or tow trucks bring them to the land. And then the land is already ready. The plumbing is on. You just drop it down. And now you can make that affordable. And maybe that house is 60, 70,000. And now we're all eating, is what I'm saying. We don't have to say, well, I'm going to sell these shipping containers for $300,000 because they're doing this on the south side of Chicago. Who can afford that? So we can't take the mindset of the oppressive system and say we're going to follow that model when we know, hey, man, I got an extra 20 bands in my pocket. Boom, I already know the next 3-4 lots I'm going out to get. And by the time this year is over, we collectively, each one made $100,000 a piece. Why not we be happy with that as opposed to saying, well, I want my meal ticket this year. So I'm like, we have to get out of that mindset, because that perpetuates the crime and the poverty in our neighborhood, because we're making it unreachable. So again, there's a brother in Ohio that has a model that he's doing. I don't know the particulars about this, but I know Queen Latifah had built a project in New Jersey, and it's a blueprint. There's what I'm saying. Like, there's a building plan that we could take that same building plan. It's another sister. I cannot recall where she is, but she was homeless. She's got to be in Missouri, Louisiana. I don't know, but I got her information. But she did the same thing. She bought land and she did this. So when we see these models, we're not talking about think tanks no more. We're talking about implementation tanks. We've been thinking for too damn long. I'm just saying. No, Dr. Claude Anderson has beautiful blueprints on this wealth gap and how to sustain it, but he's never wavered off of his conversation. And so when we look at them, or Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice, who wrote that book? Brown, I can't think of it, but we have to be able to pick up those books and implement what we read them. I mean, we read, we get information and act like we got a book. It's a degree. The book is not the degree; it's the implementation of the book.
I love that. We've been doing too much thinking. Now it's time to implement. So we're in the action stages of things. And I also wanted to shout out a brother named Lanier Richardson, who's doing a lot of this commercial real estate property work across Chicago, has done some stuff in New York, New Jersey, which is where I know him from, but is going across the United States. So you guys can totally look him up. You can find him on LinkedIn and find some of the things that he's doing. He's another model, another blueprint. He focuses more on commercial real estate, which I think is still important, right? Which I think is still very much important. I mean, we need to know and own the commercial buildings while we're thinking about building our community. That's going to house our businesses. That's going to house the commerce. That's going to allow for the dollar to circulate within our community. I also love the fact that you said, let's start small and let's be cooperative. This is the basis of cooperative economics. When you talked, and this reminds me a little bit about how we've gotten so disenfranchised from who we are as a native indigenous population, knowing the land and working with the land and not being greedy as it relates to the land and really working and understanding the land. This is exactly what you're talking about, right? Let's not be like the oppressor and be greedy. Let's not be what Malcolm X likes to say our oppressor is the devil, right? Let's be who
Right.
we are. Let's be our godly selves. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think there is a lot to be said about tapping back into our ancestry and who we are as a native indigenous population.
uh, I read on Facebook the other day there was a 1965 Malibu Classic. 1965. The price for that vehicle was $3,200. Blew my mind. And I think I have some articles. 1972, the year that I was born, maybe a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house was like 13,000 or something. 50 years ago. Everybody was happy in their homes in their neighborhoods back in the 60s. You go back and look, yeah, they saying we want jobs, fair housing is this, but when you saw the neighborhoods, they were straight. My question is, how did the prices go so high? We hold fault in that, we do. And we wanted to have the status, the big house. And listen, I'm telling you, I wanted the big house too. I had 3 kids. I wanted a certain zip code because of the education system. But I've never left the roots of where I come from. That's why I'm the hood candidate. I love the hood. And so when we elaborate about that, if you're going to move out of the hood, which I'm not saying I'm not saying you should stay, go back. Like Frederick Douglass, Soldier of Truth, Harriet Tubman, and empower those still there. We look at what happened with Nipsey. I don't know the whole story, but you hear about, well, man, you was too much in the hood. I don't know. I'm saying, but we can utilize that as an example to say, maybe it ain't the best time for me to be physically present in the hood, but I can be economically present in the hood. That's what we can do. And when I'm economically present in the hood and I don't have the prices where I'm trying to make a 60, 70% return on my investment, I'm cool with a 10 to 12%. Now the community is protecting you, man. That's Kamara's spot, bro. Ain't none of that going down. No. And see, but when we make it unreachable, then everybody is on that, crabs in the barrel, I got to get this big eye, little you concept. And I feel like we need to get past that, because none of the stuff we accumulate in life is going to us when we transition. So why don't we, for everybody to enjoy, I would never make it to the Forbes list. I don't literally know how I could ever do that, because my heart is always empowering the people in the community. If I'm living good, I want you to live good. Because if I'm living good, you're not living good. Pac said this one time. He said, eventually, you knocking at the door. Hey, let me come in. I want to eat. Eventually, you're going to kick in the door. And I think we're at the point where some of us has kicked in the door, just going in the right way and fought all the ways to get in there. Some of us is ready to blow the door off. You know what I'm saying? We ready to come bring the armored trucks and blow the door off, because we tired of, this oppressive thing. And it's our own too. So, you know what I'm saying? Let's not act like it's just the oppressor. Our mindsets have to be shifted. We have to renew our minds. And that's why I say, when we read a book, we're reading the book to implement it, not to be inspired. I mean, you get the inspiration, but then take forth that implementation. This ain't no Sunday service. You come in here and feel good and then walk out the door and you just like, oh, that was a good message. F you. No, hell no. We're not doing that. No. Let's build the block. Let us, have a community where we are not looking at our neighbor as our profit margin. That's the piece that we have to get off of. I'm sorry. If you're going to be in real estate full time, great. Don't look at your neighbor as your next Bentley, though. But no, let's not do that. Now, if you want to do that, then you go over there to Beverly Hills and build you some houses and all that, where that's the geographical location of that concept. So do it there. Don't do it in the hood, because now you're driving everybody out. You're doing the gentrification and not even recognizing you're part of the problem.
Yeah, let's definitely be part of the solution. Let's rebuild, buy our communities back and rebuild them. I want to go back. I definitely want to swing here to the ownership piece, and we're going to end there. But I do want to swing to the Fair Housing Act And you said you learned so much about the particulars of the Fair Housing Act. Can you talk about that? And then can you also make sure that you relate it to the formerly incarcerated? Because I think that's also a huge population that gets overlooked quite a bit when we're having these conversations.
Right. So there's under the under the Fair Housing Act, there's this thing that says there's a disparate impact. So, for instance, my lease did not get renewed because of domestic violence. So, oh, the police was called to your house, 5 times. It was during COVID, and I'm telling you, they was called 3 times for actual arguments between me and my spouse, 2 times for me and my daughter. She getting roughed up, but hey, hold on now, and she called the police. Okay, but if you're only doing this to females that get evicted because the police come, or males, either way, because let's not say it's just one side, then that's going to create a disparate impact, saying I'm not going to renew the lease because you're using your First Amendment right to petition the government for protection, and now you're going to evict me. So in one case, the lady got beat real bad by her husband or boyfriend or whatever, and then they tried to evict her. This was in Oregon, and they sued, and she won $500,000 because you infringed upon her Fair Housing Act. The Violence Against Women Act. When you call the police or something, and then the landlord tries to evict you, that's a Fair Housing Act discrimination, because it's either live or you're under a constant fear. If I call the police because I'm afraid my spouse is going to abuse me, I'm going to get kicked out. You're in a situation where you're neutralized. You don't know what to do. And that's a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And another thing is when we deal with the formerly incarcerated, well, if you've been convicted of a felon, you cannot rent certain. It's pretty much like everywhere now. They like, if you've been convicted of a felon, you got leprosy, you finna blow up the whole world. I don't even know how this goes. But I have a situation right now where a brother was locked up, and he's in a halfway house. This is recent, like a week ago. And then they did not renew the contract with the housing, but his sister's on Section 8, and she's got room for him to go stay there. But since he's a convicted felon, he can't go stay there. But isn't it the same government that didn't renew the lease to housing as the same government that's providing Section 8? That don't even make sense to me. Well, it does, because I'm telling y'all we need to become the government. But, that's another violation of a Fair Housing Act. It's so unfair. And when I like to remind us, we're not really fighting against people. It's a spirit in this whole system that we're trying to defeat. And we're not going to defeat that spirit in no physical confrontation. That's not going to work. So we got to find a way to minimize it and neutralize it, to balance it out. And I will say this, everything the government has done is not bad. Everything the people in the government has done is not bad. That welfare to work under the Clinton administration, that was not bad. That was good, because it empowers us, to get back up on our feet. What is bad is there's no follow-up. There's no accountability. So now we become dependent on that system. 50-year-old person still on housing. Oh, you're not disabled. Come on, man. So I don't want it to make it seem like I'm anti-government. I'm anti lack of accountability from both sides. So again, when it comes to us, when I say, hey, my rights matter, I'm advocating for the rights for us to own homes, to have the things that we need. And I'm B15364, formerly incarcerated. I've never had no issue with my background on housing, though. But I not where I couldn't rent because of housing. Because to be honest with you, I just had the old dude who was buying drugs for me put it in his name when I rented an apartment. Now that I think about it, so I still had that fear of you not renting to me. Maybe it wasn't because of the background. Maybe it's because I was selling drugs, destroying the community. Maybe that's why.
Andrew, but we're gonna keep it real in this conversation. This is what I love, right? I mean, this is the point. We are all people that have rights. Period. That's like kind of just point blank. That is like I don't think I need to qualify that statement. We are all people who have rights. End of. And so for someone like you who has been there. So I think we mentioned this, that you are literally the walking testimony of the things that you are talking about, of the ideas that you have, because you've walked the talk, you learn through walking. So if there are any sort of rights that you think that, or sorry, acts that have been passed by legislation that we should be looking at as it relates to our housing rights, our land and property rights, and you don't have to go into them, but if you could just kind of name them. Obviously, we've talked about the Fair Housing Act. You just mentioned the Women Protecting Women Against Violence Act. And a couple of others. But if you wanted to just go through some that you thought, these are ones that you might want to look more into for yourself, if you're thinking about what does it actually mean to protect my housing, land, and property rights.
Right. So I think it always goes on a case-by-case scenario. But when you have a Fair Housing Act claim, more than likely you have a breach of contract claim, and more than likely you have a trespass claim. Private landlords can violate the Fair Housing Act, and you can get them under the Ku Klux Klan Act, because what would happen back in the 1900s or whatever is that private landlords or private property owners would discriminate against people of color. So they allowed you under it's a section 1985-3 to bring a claim against a private party for depriving you of your Fair Housing Act rights, which your rights is not the fair housing. Your rights is you're entitled to fair housing, and the Fair Housing Act protects those rights and hold those that infringe upon those rights accountable. So that's what that does. But essentially, it's really just a breach of contract in essence, that you don't need an act for that. Which, again, I think solutions, the best way to do it is just we get our own property and we do right by each other. That'll eliminate all that. But the Fair Housing Act, if there's any place I would ever say to start with that Fair Housing Act, because you got administrative agencies like HUD, Human Rights Commission, places like that don't require you to file a lawsuit to advocate if your rights have been infringed or deprived. There's certain administrative agencies in the state that are set up to help this out. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So we've got that. So I want to talk more a little bit around you yourself are currently renting, I believe you said, and then hopefully if you win your case, you're going to take that money and buy property. And then you mentioned about us having a certain mindset and being beholden to a system that is not accountable for itself, and it's hard for us to hold them accountable, which is why we need to become the government. I was just having this conversation with a group of women, in fact, around how there's this mindset around just being renters in communities of color, in communities that are lower on the socioeconomic side. How do you suggest we start making that shift from being a renter to being an owner? Because I do think a lot of this is mindset. The resources are out there. We can actually even use government funding to go own homes, to go own commercial real estate, to buy land, and which I do believe is a part of reparations, restitution. We can go use that funding and not use our money. We can use other people's money to get our own stuff. But I think, to your point, there's a mindset that's happening that has been blocked for generations. Maybe a learned helplessness, a learned reliability on the system. How can we start changing that mindset? How can we start empowering the ownership mindset of our communities?
I think that one, the churches should be more like they were in the 60s. So the Fair Housing Act or home ownership classes, the churches need to be hosting those monthly, like each time. And, you pick a family or 2 or 3, whatever, and you work with them directly, and then you allow them to be the testimony. And if they move out of an apartment, then we make sure ain't nobody in our congregation necessarily moving back into that apartment. So then now they got to sell it, and then we buy it. Like real talk, like when you would boycott a store or something, the Montgomery bus boycotts, we'll get what we need if we come together collectively. And not everybody wants to own a home, but if they don't want to own a home, we should be the ones that are there. I hate to use the word landlord. It's just a bad word because you're lording over the land. Like you look at the root cause of that, you're lording over the land. But we would be the ones that they will be renting from, and we would be fair. We don't have to raise the rents just because that's what everybody else do. And again, we have the power. We the people have the power to change this to be what it needs to be. So I think it's just a matter of those that desire to do it. I think anytime you look for some information, you'll find it. I can only say that because I've been self-taught. So whenever I start digging, it just seems to come up. I got certain algorithms that just work on my computer that just I find it. But it didn't start out that way. I had to do some searching and digging. And when you want something and you go after it, you will always get it. That's the law of nature. It's a natural thing. And when we get back to that nature mindset, which takes time. I mean, it really does. But if I know better, then I'm going to teach my children to do better. Even if I'm not doing better right now, I still can teach them so they don't have to go through what I went through. So I think the first step is, because the churches are so much in our communities and they're closed Monday through Fridays, for the most part, we really need to say, listen, you're in the community. The people are investing into this economic base in the church. Well, why are we not buying land? And so, there's churches that are doing it. So let me not say that all churches are like that, but you asked the question. I'm saying I think that would be a great start. You already get a tax break. They got faith-based grants from the government that has you not to compromise your belief system. So do that. And now it becomes a source of income for the church. So we're not so much dependent on the tithes and offerings from the congregation. And now we're helping the people get free.
Yes, I love that. And I'm glad you brought up tithes and offering and another way for them to make money instead of getting 10% of the salaries from our community. Before we go, I definitely want to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court ruling. As you mentioned, we have some KKK members up in there. But the Supreme Court ruling that literally has allowed states and municipalities to criminalize homelessness or criminalize the unhoused. Can you just talk a little bit about your feelings and thoughts around that ruling, and then how we can fight against it? We've got people who are working 2-3 jobs and still need to live in their cars, or need to be moving around. Or to your point, there are women who have left particularly abusive situations with children, et cetera, and all they have is maybe the shelter and moving from shelter to shelter. So I would just love to hear maybe some of your thoughts and maybe some of the ways that we could potentially combat this ruling, if we can.
I'm glad this is via Zoom and not in person, because I'm going to share my story. I think some people might want to stone me behind this. That Grant's case ruling, I think it is correct in a way, and I'm going to explain why.
Yep.
If there's a bias that we have when somebody is houseless, you're living on the street, you're doing this, there's still an element of public safety. So what I feel, and I don't know because I'm not in the decisions, I don't know, but I think it was more of a public safety issue, saying if you can just sleep in the park and do these other things, listen, there could be harm that's happening from that, which is still fear, but I think that could have been more of the direction of the suit. I mean, the direction of the decision. I also feel that there's a lot of energy and synergy that was wrapped around that case, a lot of financial resources that was wrapped around that avenue. What if that money would have been invested in saying, well, we're going to buy us a shelter? Because it was only, I don't want to say only, but I remember reading it and I'm saying, well, if we spent that money buying a shelter or a hotel that was abandoned or whatever, who knows, or built a hotel, we would solve that issue right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then while you're in the hotel, you have that community room that you're teaching about financing, budgeting, economic health. So you're actually empowering people to not depend on the government. And if the officers or whoever is arresting somebody, well, we would have a template for false arrest because nobody got injured, and that decision, it takes me back to parallel to after the 13th Amendment passed, and then they started passing legislation about vagrancy. If you didn't have a job, this. So I would have pulled that up under the 13th Amendment claim and said this is a badge and incident of slavery. That's what I would have pulled it up under. And so, but even though that was not done, that's what I think we can move forward saying, here's the positive side behind that decision. Now it says, listen, y'all, we know the government is not going to take care of us. We know the government is not protecting our rights the way we feel. So why don't we do it though? That's the point. Because it's easy, because it's an election cycle, it's easy to cast a vote on November 5th and say, I did my duty. Bull crap.
Yeah.
No, you didn't. And now one of y'all suing none of these elected officials for violating their oath that I'm aware of. And I'm doing it. So listen, we ain't talking about something. I done sued Trump, Governor Pritzker, 31 states. Listen, you infringe upon the rights of the people, I'm coming at you. Because that's my strength, And if I would have got that money, boy, let me tell you, we'd have got that little 17 acres over here in Aurora, and I'd have put that compound up there together, and we would have had a housing over there, and then the houseless people, we would have said, come on over here, but I'm not giving you no 2-3 years stay over here. This 6 months. Come on. And if you ain't abiding by the system that's set up that we know empowers you, then check out time. Because you still have to be accountable. We can't be so empathetic and have sympathy with the people that we begin to hurt ourselves. And this is lived experience. I know. I've done that too. So now it's like, look, this is what it takes. And I'm sure there's still grace. So let's not act like, it's 6 months and it's out the door. But we have to have a system that's set up in place that has room for, growth. But we have to have a structure set up. And so back to that grants housing, I think there's some positive to take from that. Saying we have the power to be the solution. All the money that was spent back in Marcellus case. Listen, Joe, we could have invested that. What, it was locked up since 2001. What was that, 20 years, 23 years? We could have got a governor in there. And that's what we got to understand politics now. If the money that was taken from our ancestors because of the reverse redlining, we get to go after these banks under the Community Reinvestment Act. We don't got to litigate. We just got to hold you accountable because you're part of that system as a corporation. So you need to take those funds and invest in the Community Reinvestment Act. And then if you don't do it, then we file a rule to show clause to say, why are you violating, whatever the Community Reinvestment Act is doing. You're disproportionately violating equal treatment and these other things. And we'll get the money that way. But it has to be a plan for it. You got to give that money an assignment. So I think it's an opportunity to take that case over there and say, look, let's build it. And I can assure you that's on my calendar to-do list come 2025.
I know that's right. Give that money an assignment. I love that. You've got some great sayings that we have, some great action items, some great steps. Before we close out, Andy, aka the Hood Candidate, anything you want to leave the audience with? And then after this, I will put on the show notes how people can keep in contact with you, your socials, website, etc.
Man, I don't. You know what? For anybody that's watching this and thinking about housing and where to start or whatever, look inside of you, feel inside of you and say, what am I passionate about and what angers me? That's the start. If you want to see your community better, then how do you see that happening? And if it's just one idea, work that idea till you can't work it no more. If you say, I'm tired of being in this apartment, I want to move into a house, then work. I want to remodel my house. They have CBDG block grants, that you can utilize to get your house. They have certain neighborhoods for teachers or firefighters that if you move into here and you stay for a certain amount of time, you get this forgivable grant. It's all about the research. That's it. And Google, listen, Google. Hey, what is this? What can it do? And don't give up hope. Because a lot of times we start at this one area and we want to see that quick fix. You know what I'm saying? We done got an oak tree problem because we didn't deal with it when it was the oak seed, you know, the little acorn seed. Now it's to become the oak tree, and we want to see that removed right away. Some people have the ability to do that. Some people don't. I'm saying don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged.
Man, I love that. Thank you for ending on hope, Andy Hope Williams Jr. I really appreciate that, my brother, the Hood candidate. We'll be back again next Wednesday. Next Wednesday will actually just be a recap. So it'll just be me talking about what we have learned, all the resources that have been shared over these last 4 weeks, and then what you guys can look forward to from now through the election. And we're going to keep going. This is so important that we start buying our blocks, owning our property, bringing our land back, and becoming the solution that we want to see. So thank you again, Andy. I really appreciate you. Bye, everyone. Peace.